Welcome to Love Lately, the podcast where we dive into the real conversations about love, relationship, and all the joys and challenges that come along with finding love and keeping it after 50.
Okay, so look, whether you're looking for love, starting over, or navigating the ins and outs of long-term commitment, we're just here to share our journey and the insights we've discovered with you.
I'm Lee, and this is my husband, Ron, and we definitely don't have all the answers. Like, trust me, we do not have all the answers. But we have many questions, and we want to unpack them with you. We will talk about what love looks like in this stage of life and how we can make it work.
So grab your favorite drink, get comfortable, and join us for honest, heartfelt, faith-filled conversations that remind us all it is never too late for love.
Welcome to Love Lately. Welcome to Love Lately.
Welcome, guys.
Either welcome back or thank you for joining us again. We're so happy that you're here.
Yes.
And today we are going to talk about boundaries. Boundaries.
Yes.
I am so excited about this conversation because it kind of is one of the things that attracted me to my husband.
Yes.
And we're going to talk a little bit about how I established or how I noticed his boundaries and who he is and how he communicates his boundaries.
Yes.
And we're going to define what boundaries are,
yes,
why they're important, especially as we get older and we're going into new relationships. Establishing boundaries are critical.
Yes. Our well-being is important. And like I said, we just want to talk about boundaries, just a clear definition of what boundaries are,
Yeah.
What it looks like. Just kind of focusing on those relationships and how boundaries are really essential and helpful.
Yeah, they're helpful.
In developing relationships and keeping relationships and building a healthy relationship.
Yeah, and I love his definition of boundaries, so we're going to get into that in just a second. But I want to first talk about how I discovered this man's boundaries. One of them. He has many. But it's one of the reasons why I think I was actually really attracted to him, because he's very sure of who he is. And his boundaries weren't, he's walking around and just telling people what his boundaries are. It's, he knows who he is, what's important to him, what his values are, all those things. And it just came out in natural conversation. So it actually drew me to him and helped us to establish a healthy relationship. But I will say almost 1 year in, we're still discovering each other's boundaries, know?
Yes. And they change.
Yeah.
They change. You just kind of grow and change, and you just kind of adjust those boundaries to, those different phases of your life.
Yes. Yeah.
Different phases of your life. You mentioned the word values and how important it is to know your values. We talked about it in one of our earlier episodes, knowing your values and being concrete on those, know where you stand and what you do in that inventory, being honest with yourself, knowing where your life is at the moment, knowing where you want to go in your life, and then setting those boundaries that just produce those healthy results. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Those things that kind of focus on your well-being, not just for yourself, but also for possibly someone that you're interested in.
Right. And I as we get into this, I don't want to skip too far ahead, because I love what you were sharing with me earlier about keeping things in, keeping things out.
Right.
But how and when I discovered I fell in love with a man of boundaries. So our very first conversation on the phone, we were texting or messaging or something each other back and forth. And I was more of let me get some work done. Let me get some stuff done in the evening and talk late at night, talk later in the evening and get to know him. And I'm done with everything.
Yes.
And he was like, well, can we talk earlier than that? And I'm like, okay, I guess. And I really didn't know why at the time, but we set a time to talk, probably about 7:00. And when we finally talked, he did tell me that he has to get up early. And he likes to go to bed and wind down by a certain time. And so I thought, oh, okay, that's nice to know. But as we kept dating, it wasn't like a one-time thing. This was consistent.
Yes.
And I don't care if we were in an argument, if we were having, whatever the situation, a great conversation, he was going to wind it up and get ready to do his bedtime routine and and I love one day when we were talking about this, much later, I respected the boundary, but much later, when I probably tried to push the boundary, he said to me, I know how I want to feel when I go to work. Yes. My work is important to me. I want to be alert, on top of things. Safety is important to me. I need my sleep. So that took a lot of self-awareness. Yes. I understood his values, that work is a big value for him, and being his best, he has a great work ethic. So that helped me to have a healthy relationship with him and learn more about his values and who he is. But that's just an example of setting boundaries early.
Yes. And I appreciated you understanding that boundary, and it didn't cause any conflict in our relationship. It didn't cause any bumps or any stumbles in the relationship. Yeah. The boundary was set. I kind of explained to you what it was. I like to get to bed at a certain time. I want to feel, rested and energetic and alert and safety conscious in the morning. And I just appreciated that you listened, you understood that, and it didn't produce any negative energy.
Right.
It didn't produce any negative energy. It was something that you understood and you accepted, and we've been able to continue to keep that boundary.
Yes, he still keeps those boundaries. And as a matter of fact, I gotta hurry up this podcast.
And it had nothing to do. It had nothing to do with you, and I'm glad you didn't take it that way. It's just, we talked about a boundary. For me is it's like limitations or guidelines that you place in your life according to what's important to you and how you want to live your life. Those are just limitations and guidelines that you establish, according to what you want out of life, whether it's in work, relationship, home, whatever it is. Boundaries are healthy. Boundaries can be helpful for both parties, but it's something that you're establishing. We talked about values in an earlier episode, and how when you're concrete on your values and you know what you stand for, you know the type of life you want to live and the things that you want to do, that you start to set those boundaries that fall in line with those values.
Yeah.
And it's I'm just setting those guidelines and those standards to continue to move forward in what's important to me.
Right. And I love the word guidelines. I love the word standards. And thinking about boundaries in that type of way. And I like the imagery of a street, a house, and with the house lined with trees in front of it, and a yard, and everything in your yard is the way that you would want it to be.
Yes.
And it's not saying that people can't come on into your yard and maybe borrow your hose. But if you borrow it, my boundary, if I say yes, my boundary may be, I need you to put it back like you found it.
Yes.
And so it's definitely, I like how you put it earlier. It's not necessarily keeping people out. We were talking about this before. It's showing people what you will accept and what's okay for you. It's not about manipulation.
Yes.
It's not about changing anyone. You didn't care what I did after 10 o'clock after he went to bed. He's just saying, in my life, in what is important for me, this is what I feel comfortable with.
Yes.
Whatever you choose to do, I could have chosen, you know what, this is not going to work for me. I'm a late night person. I want someone who's a late night owl. And I think he would have been okay with that, but he was just very clear on, in my yard, this is what works for me.
Yes.
So think about your yard, who you are as a person, and what's important for you.
It's just helping you to maintain that standard that you have set.
Yes.
You know, this is like I said, this is my yard, this is my home. And boundaries are not always meant to keep things out.
Yes, I love this.
Boundaries are also meant to protect what's within.
Yes.
It keeps it safe.
Yes.
It keeps what's safe, keeps safe what's important to you, what you value. You know, those things that you have set concrete in your life, that you want, those things you want to live by. So it's important to protect those things. As we were talking, I mentioned about a scripture that just came to my head about, it's in Proverbs 4 where it says to protect your heart with all diligence, for out of it flow the issues of life.
Yes.
It's just that protection. I thought about the word diligence, and it's just that careful, persistent work.
Yes.
It's that careful and persistent work, persistent me all the time. So I need to be on guard all the time, not just from what I'm allowing in, also protecting what's already there.
Yes.
Protecting what I've established.
Yeah.
Protecting what's in my heart. Protecting that life that I want to live. Protecting those values that I want to live by. Protecting that standard that I've set for myself.
Right.
And involving yourself with someone, it's important that you talk about those boundaries. Those boundaries shouldn't cause any offense.
No.
Those boundaries should be, respected and honored and talked about. And so that way we understand kind of where we're at. And so then she didn't take offense to mine. Baby, it's 10 o'clock. And it's my bedtime.
Right.
I need to shut it down, And this continued on throughout our relationship prior to marriage. I love you, but, I got to go.
Right.
I got to go.
Exactly. But I will say that boundaries, sometimes when we establish boundaries and tell people our boundaries, they may not accept it, or it may feel like they're not happy with it or pushing up against it. And so sometimes we will feel uncomfortable or maybe have some guilt, or there might be a feeling when we're establishing our boundaries, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
That's okay. It's like a muscle. Just keep working through it. But the people who want to be in your life and want a healthy relationship with you will honor your boundaries.
Yes.
Will honor them.
And like I always say, it's always about your well-being. It's about your well-being and establishing those things that you want to allow in, those things that you want to keep in, and not allow it to be affected by all the exterior stuff that could be going on. It's important. It's important that we continue to be diligent about our lives. It creates healthy relationships. It creates healthy workspaces. It creates a healthy home. And not taking offense to those things that we may not understand.
Yeah.
It may seem a little odd. It may seem a little weird sometimes, but it's important that we just always talk about being open-minded.
So before we give some tips on how to establish some boundaries in your relationship, why do you think sometimes people have a hard time establishing their boundaries or setting boundaries?
Well, I always kind of relate that to fear.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we're just afraid to say no.
Yeah.
Sometimes, some people call it people pleasing.
People pleasing.
People pleasing. And you want to be accommodating. You want to be, just always there and open. But it's important that we set those boundaries, especially those healthy boundaries that keep out those things, whether it's visual, whether it's audible, whether it's people, whether it's places, whether it's things, that we continue to guard ourselves, not being accepting of, stuff that we've always been accustomed to accepting. Right. It's okay to say no.
Yes.
It's okay to set a boundary. It's okay to, not be always accommodating.
Yeah, but I do think, because I will say I've had a hard time setting boundaries in my life. And even now, sometimes I want to be seen as nice. I think sometimes women have a harder time sometimes setting boundaries because we're taught to be good. We're taught to be nice. We're taught to not some of us, not to be too bossy or aggressive or whatever it is. And so therefore we try to accommodate. So whatever's happened in your life, know your childhood issues that have come out, or make your lived experiences that have helped make you who you are. And that may shine some light on if you have a hard time establishing boundaries. But I think the people pleasing, I think sometimes we have guilt. And sometimes it's honestly church guilt or Christian guilt. Because I just remember sometimes I would not say no because I felt like, well, I'm supposed to give. I'm supposed to help people. I'm supposed to be there and answer the phone anytime at night and listen to the person on the phone who wants to talk for hours over their problems, you know. So, yeah, some guilt, people pleasing. Yes.
We've had this conversation before about you're very accommodating. You like to help and say yes and be involved whenever someone calls. And sometimes we have to have the conversation. It's time to step away from that.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes things are brought about in our lives for a season, and sometimes it's okay. And that's for that moment. And life is cyclical. So sometimes we can have a moment where we can set that boundary and say, okay, that was for that time. Now, this time, it's time to move away from that.
Yeah.
I don't have to continue to say yes. I don't have to continue to be accommodating. That was my time and my season for that.
Yeah.
And so sometimes you're able to pull away from that and set that boundary. And it's a healthy boundary, especially sometimes when you find yourself pouring out. And then sometimes there's nothing being poured back.
Yes. Yeah.
Then you find yourself empty because you've always continued to be accommodating.
Yes.
You find yourself drained and empty because there's nothing being poured back into you.
Right.
So healthy boundaries.
Yeah.
Well-being, my well-being. And sometimes if someone is concerned about your well-being, then they can be understanding about those boundaries that are set up. Sometimes people get so accustomed to the yes that the 1,000 yeses, but the one no seems to be offensive.
You're right.
So sometimes, there's 1,000 yeses, but the one no can be offensive. But it's okay to say no. I always sell it. There's nothing wrong with my no button.
So do you think, I saw that someone, this was on social media or something, and someone was talking about if you're too nice, and you have a lack of boundaries, you're opening yourself up for disrespect. Do you think that's true? Like if we don't establish our boundaries in dating, do we risk disrespect from people or someone taking advantage of us?
It's up to the individual to set that boundary.
Yeah, but what if you're not good at setting boundaries? And we're going to talk about this, but you don't even know what your boundaries are.
Listen, well, I'm glad we're doing this podcast. So we're talking about the need for boundaries.
Yeah.
There has to be.
So that's what I'm saying. If someone doesn't have them.
Yes, it's important.
Do men see it as like, this girl don't have no boundaries?
Yes, I mean, you have to be able to set up that guard.
The yard.
Not saying that it's a guard to keep everything out and to be just this wall that's set up, but it has to be something healthy that you're allowing in, something that's catered to your well-being, something that's good for you. And those things that are not, you're protecting yourself from those things. I'm guarding what's important to me, guarding what's coming in. I'm guarding what's already there. I've established those values in my life. I've established all those things that I want. We're at a point in our lives where we know what we want. More so, we know what we don't want.
Yeah. And you agree that we do teach people how to treat us.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
We do teach people how to treat us. Yeah. According to what we accept, those boundaries that we allow ourselves not to have.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So let's talk a few minutes about how to establish your boundaries, especially as you're dating and in a relationship and also in marriage. And so one thing that we advise on setting healthy boundaries is, number one, is to know what your boundaries are. And that goes back to what you were saying about values. You need to know your values and what's important to you. And also just overall self-awareness. If there's anything that makes you uncomfortable in a relationship, a friendship, a relationship, that emotion is a flag or something going off to tell you that there's a boundary that's being crossed. You may not even be able to articulate it, so sit with yourself and figure out what it is, but pay attention to your emotions, pay attention to what doesn't feel right for
Absolutely.
you.
Absolutely. I agree 1,000%, especially in establishing relationships, relationships and setting those boundaries. And like you said, we do teach people how to treat us, but it's important that we, like I said before, that we know our values, we know what we stand for, and we guard ourselves. We guard ourselves from people, conversations, what we see, what we hear. If it's something I have concrete in my mind, what I want to establish in this relationship. And so anything that's detrimental to that, which I'm trying to form and establish, I look out for those feelings. I guard what I hear. I guard who I listen to. I guard the things that I watch. I guard all those things.
Right. And so understanding what your boundaries are, understanding what they are, being clear about your values, self-awareness, how you want to set up your life. The second part of boundaries is you have to know how to communicate your boundaries.
Yes.
So a lot of times, and I've been guilty of this, I'm raising all hands, where I may have a boundary, something that I like, something that I don't like, but I'll get into passive aggressive mode where I have it in my head and I'm thinking that other person should know. Can't you see I'm silent? Can't you see I don't like it, or I'm mad? They should know not to be late. They should know to call me before whatever the situation is, but you've never communicated it.
Absolutely. Yeah. It is important to communicate those boundaries. It is important to communicate those boundaries and make them clear, and so that you've established them. You know what it is that you want. You know what it is you're willing to accept. You know what it is that you're not willing to accept. And so I think it's important that we be honest with ourselves and be able just to stand on those things and be concrete on those things. And
so as communicating your boundaries, either
directly speaking them to someone or
in a healthy way.
In a healthy way.
In a healthy way, yeah.
In a healthy way.
Yeah. And then also the third point and the final point in establishing the boundaries is implementing them. Because sometimes we will know the boundary, we may communicate it, but then we waver when it's time. We compromise when it's time to stand in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so what that communicates is, especially if you're dating someone, is I can change this boundary. It's not really a boundary, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the compromise does open the door for those things to come in and kind of just disturb my yard, kind of stir things up. And it's important that we do continue to be firm and set those things that we've established as a boundary.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. So hopefully you've learned a few things today about boundaries and thinking about what your boundaries are and how important they are for you to, first of all, know them, implement them, communicate them, because it will help you in your relationships.
And boundaries shouldn't be used as a weapon.
No.
Boundaries are healthy. They should be healthy. They should be something that builds relationships. It be something that establishes relationships, makes relationships stronger. It's something that builds your own well-being. And also the person that you may be interested in, or whatever relationship you want to establish. So it shouldn't be used as anything, as a weapon. It should be something that's talked about openly. We can discuss it, be open-minded about your boundaries, listening to someone else's boundaries, and allow it to just establish, make the relationship a little more healthy.
And then another point that I wanted to make, when one of the reasons why we sometimes don't stand firm in our boundaries is, and we talked about this earlier, and I really want to really land on this point, that you have to like your boundaries and understand the why of your boundaries. Because if they're challenged or pushed or something comes up, and I'm not saying we don't ever be flexible in certain things, but you need to understand the why of your boundaries and like them so much that you don't have a problem communicating them and standing in them. He was very clear on the why of 10 o'clock at night for him. Very clear. And so he had no problem communicating them and didn't think twice about it. So I think it's know your why. Know your why behind your boundaries so you can stand in it.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So thank you once again for joining this episode on boundaries. If you have not listened to some of our past episodes, please go back and please subscribe if you have not. Please. And leave some comments. Let us know how you're enjoying the podcast and if there are any topics that we can talk about and bring some information on and have a discussion about. Please let us know.
Yes.
All right. Thank you all so much and see you the next time.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Love Lately. We hope today's conversation sparked some thoughts and maybe even some inspiration for your own love story.
Remember, love does not have an expiration date. It should always be evolving and growing, and so are we together.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave us a review, and share it with someone who might need a little encouragement in their love journey.
And if you have any questions or topics you'd like us to discuss, just drop us a line. We'd love to hear from you.
Until next time, keep finding, building, and enjoying love lately.